Hey everyone, welcome to the 14 Wins podcast. This is Bones, and of course we have Ramex with us.
Hey everyone.
And what we are going to talk about is what we alluded to in our last episode, and that is the charlatans in the field of the paranormal. And of course, there are a lot of them, but we want to focus in on the 70s, and in particular Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were part of the Amityville Horror hoax.
Yeah, Ed and Lorraine really made their mark. That's the case that really made them, was the Amityville Horror case. And we were fortunate. If you read our article, you can read why we clearly think Ed and Lorraine Warren were lying and they were con artists. I won't go through all of the details that are in the article, but the Amityville Horror case was brought up in a court case because people were suing about the money and rights to the story, and whether or not the story was fiction was relevant to that trial. That court case, fortunately, brought out all the evidence that they were making claims about, and the judge declared the work fiction.
Right.
All of that evidence was there, and people had already reviewed it, and so it was very easy for us to find and tell that the Warrens were not being honest. And it went on like that. We found other cases like the Enfield haunting with these twins, and there was some very serious paranormal researchers that were there. And Ed Warren showed up, and this guy, his name is Guy Lyon Playfair. He's a well-known serious paranormal researcher, and he said Ed Warren showed up and basically said, hey, we can make a lot of money on this. All you got to do is,
Right.
And he wanted nothing to do with them. And he also said they were only there for a brief amount of time and then left and then made up a bunch of stuff afterwards. That ends up being the movie,
right?
Conjuring, in The Conjuring.
Yeah.
So those movies have made $1 billion.
It's crazy, the timeline too, because if you look at they got into that around 1975, and then there was already a book published like maybe 2 years later that the movie was based off of.
Right.
So I mean, they were movers and shakers.
They were. They made a lot of money. And Ed Warren was driving a bus and doing some painting before this.
Oh, really?
Lorraine was doing other stuff. And then when the Amityville Horror case comes, they'd say, oh, we're ghost hunters, and we're going to go in there, and we're going to spend the night in the house. So a news camera films them going into the house and films them leaving the next day. Well, the Warren's whole scam was that Lorraine was a medium who could talk to ghosts. And Ed was a demonologist, exorcist, that would remove the ghosts, right? So she's talking to ghosts you never saw, and he's removing ghosts you never saw.
Right.
That was their whole scam.
Right.
And then when Ed Warren was a bus driver, there's allegations that was made by a woman who clearly was affiliated with them. And she had said when she was 15, her and Ed Warren began an affair. And she ended up moving in with the Warrens, and her parents weren't happy about that.
Jeez.
She was 15 years old. She also claimed there was a famous piece of video footage that the Warrens said, oh, we filmed a ghost, and there's a woman in white walking in a graveyard. It's called The Lady in White, and she claimed to be the woman in the lady in a white dress that was walking in the graveyard. Ed said, hey, walk through the graveyard.
Right.
None of this looks very good.
No.
And it goes on like that through all of the Warren cases. And you pointed out that the time frame, and there was a lot going on in the church at the time.
Oh, right. You mean like
the satanic
craze?
panic of the 70s. And
panic. That's right.
Late 70s, early 80s. This ends up being right. And they Ed Warren had a sense for this. All good con men, all these men who have charisma and can get people to believe in this stuff, all have that sort of way about them. And they have a sense, a predator sense for where the weakness and where the vulnerability is. And I think it's especially tragic when con artists take advantage of religious people. People are genuine in their faith. They're believers at heart.
There's a trust involved, or a perceived trust that is being manipulated. Yeah.
And they're used to placing their trust in someone in the clergy. So Ed Warren liked to portray himself as being an ally of the clergy or on some sort of weapon of the Catholic Church, when, we clearly point out that the archdiocese, particularly in the Amityville case, said no, nothing like what he's describing in The Exorcist ever happened. So Yeah, saw that vulnerability. They were Catholics, and other researchers have pointed out that a lot of their targets were Catholics, and they knew where the weakness was.
Oh, really?
And Catholics, there's a lot more saints involved. There's a lot more room for ghosts and spirits and things like that in Catholicism.
Oh, yeah. There's an ancient history.
Yeah. So why were we looking into ghosts at all? And I would say we're Forteans, but we really started this, as we told you, by looking into how UFOs flew and whether they were real or not. So why were we looking into ghosts? We're not just into any sort of fringe subject that comes along. That ends up touching, UFOs end up touching a lot of fringe subjects. We have to learn a little bit more about them. So poltergeists, for example, poltergeist activity is reported consistently around UFOs. And we think that that's an extremely important trait to understanding this phenomenon. People witness a UFO and then they report things moving in the house. They report doors slamming, all the same things that you report in places that are quote unquote haunted, right? So we looked into that, and poltergeist activity is a real thing. We're not saying ghosts don't exist. My gut analysis on the whole thing was that there were some cases that seemed clearly related to the UFO phenomenon, and there were other cases that seemed to be related to the afterlife or some sort of spirit, or energy or consciousness that had been there. And there was evidence. There was a lot of it. So I'm not saying ghosts aren't real. We're saying that the Warrens took advantage of people who knew ghosts were real. And that also brings us to the fact that charlatans still exist. So we don't want to talk about these old cases and not have them be relevant to today. So poltergeist activity, tons of it gets reported at Skinwalker Ranch. Okay, and we think that place is so important to our research because it's a cornucopia of all this paranormal stuff all in one place. And it's very easy to move the narrative about what UFOs are by moving it away from all this high strangeness. If you want UFOs to be about extraterrestrials, you probably don't like what's happening at Skinwalker Ranch, even though it all could point to extraterrestrial. But you'd rather have it be something in a ship that's flying around that you can talk to at some point.
Something relatable, right? Right.
And when you start looking into the high strangeness parts of this, when you start looking into the ghosts, when you start looking into the cryptids, and you go, these things are part of the UFO phenomenon. They happen in the same locations where UFOs are seen. We can prove that over and over and over. So it's part of it. I'm not telling you that the Mothman is flying UFOs. We're just trying to understand it all, right? And you have to take this wider view, and that's where the Fortean thing comes in. So those people, those con artists, just like, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who I would, this is just my personal opinion, I think we're doing that for money and fame. That was their motive.
Yep.
But there's other con artists out there who, we know this for a fact, have taken money from dirty intelligence people to plant stories in the media about paranormal and UFO related stuff.
Right. So kind of cloud the topic.
Yeah, exactly. So there's very good evidence. Famous UFO critic in the 80s and 90s, we went on for decades, Philip Klass, that he was taking money from the CIA to disabuse the UFO topic. There's an entire documentary called Mirage Men, an former Air Force serviceman, intelligence officer, who goes through how they used to run intelligence, disinformation, and misinformation operations on the American people.
No kidding.
That is so far outside of what the Air Force is allowed to do. Right. I can't even tell you. And this, so, watch the documentary, research this guy. His name is Richard Doty. He's trying to do ufology now. And I don't know why anyone would believe someone who already I appreciate the fact that he came forward and said he was a disinformation agent at one point. But then obviously we can't really look at what he says afterwards with too much credibility, unfortunately. And that's just kind of how I feel about it, but other people may feel differently. I'm not going to name names. Like I named Richard Doty in the name of a positive light, but because I don't think it does us any good to go around and bash a bunch of UFO researchers who are popular. Their ideas may appeal to you and maybe you find something in it. I don't want to do that, but I am going to give you a code book on how to find them. So you should be able to do this based on what I'm telling you. The first way to find a UFO or paranormal charlatan is that they're giving you all the answers. That's the first way. I have all the answers. I have found the key. Cool. Where's the key? Like, can you summarize it for us?
Right.
Specifically, people doing this today who are saying, I have all the answers. These are extraterrestrials. Here is their agenda.
Right.
And they're saying that without any evidence. They're also saying this is what the government is doing. And they're saying that
just
without any evidence. Yeah, just confidence. Which is the key to a good con. There's several of these who say, I have the keys to the UFO mystery. First of all, if they're telling you point of origin, show me evidence.
Right.
Because that's a big question that we have at Fortean Wins. We don't know the answer to that yet.
Right.
So we do some pretty good research. I was once told I'm a crackerjack researcher.
Okay.
Crackerjack.
What does that mean? I don't like crackerjack.
And I have been dying to put that on my resume. But we do some pretty good research here, and we haven't been able to find out where UFOs come from. And I don't think the government has either. So if someone's telling you that without any evidence, it's a good sign they're a con man.
Right.
The other thing that I would point out is these intelligence assets. If you want evidence, go to Philip Glass. Like, there's good evidence that Philip Glass was taking money from the CIA to say things that were contrary to UFO truth.
Right.
That what they do is they say, okay, you can continue your research. However, we want you to say just these one or two things. We want you to push in just one or two directions. And this is like, it's very deal with the devil. This is how the CIA works in the geopolitical realm, and they shouldn't be doing it with UFOs, but they have been doing it. So, and it is the CIA, because the FBI doesn't seem to know jack about this. My opinion. Those things are my opinion. They'll say, okay, we just want you to push on this one or two things. And they know what they're doing, right? Those one or two things are going to throw off the whole mystery, or they're going to make somebody look like a charlatan when they're not. So this is how gray this subject gets. Really got to make you wonder what they're hiding. It looks to me like these days there are people who have a really serious problem with anything that what we're talking about, like the high strangeness, Skinwalker Ranch related stuff, anything that takes this conversation away from hardware and extraterrestrial, which may end up being what this is. We can't say with any certainty that all of this is not caused by extraterrestrials and hardware. It's just that the truth seems to look a lot more complex.
Right.
And the people that I see appear to have a weird agenda. Like, keep attacking whistleblowers in the public, keep attacking Skinwalker Ranch in a weird way. Those people, to me, look like potentially intelligence assets.
Right.
So people should be mindful of that.
Going back to the 70s and what you called the satanic panic. I mean, so all this stuff, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Everything's just, there's a cultural phenomenon happening all over you, right? And in the 70s, there was panic, there was changing, and the music was changing. There was panic when it came to religion. Are we going the wrong way? Is our kids going to grow up being satanic and all that? So we understand the cultural realm that they were working with. Well, after that, after the 70s, after the 80s, what's the answer? Why are people doing it? I mean, now you talk about people online. I think now we're kind of living through this the past 10 years, I'd say, we're living through this kind of strange new world of just nonsense online, like social media.
Our bubbles.
And it's a cultural phenomenon, social media is.
Yeah.
So you got charlatans just using it for their own means.
Absolutely. They understand that you live in an information bubble. And we all do, right?
Right.
All of us. Even you and I, who are trying to burst our way out of it, are still in our own information bubble, and we'd be fools to think that we weren't. They take advantage of that, and they get you into that. They know what you're seeing, and what they know is, and this is a field that I work in, right? So I do understand this. Like, I know that if you like golf, you're more likely to have a pool. Right?
Right. Okay.
I know if I'm selling pool stuff, that's how I can get to you. When we advertise, or when someone targets an audience for something political, it gets even easier.
Right.
And it makes us so vulnerable, and it's so important for us to really develop critical thinking skills. And it's up to all of us to try to figure out where is someone being contrary going to help me? And where is it going to help my research? And where is it going to send me backwards? We need criticism. We need to challenge our own beliefs. We need to challenge our own theories, especially when we get further down the road. Like I avoided reading Jacques Vallée until very recently. I would only read his scientific papers, and I would only read articles about him, but I wouldn't read his books because I knew his theories were getting too close to my own. So that's confirmation bias, right?
Right.
So I would really encourage people to do this with any news story you care about. UFOs are one of them, but you could apply this to politics and world events as well. If you really care about that news story, you want to read it in one source, and then you want to go read a competing source. So if you read it in something that's left-leaning, you want to read it in something that's right-leaning. And then you want to read it on the AP, because they're going to try to remove all of that. And then... And then I would also recommend reading it from an international source, like The Guardian or Al Jazeera. You're not going to read 4 articles, but if you really care about something, read all of them. You'll find something different in all of them, and you'll find different perspectives. And then you're going to have to kind of sift through it. And this is really how we have to get information today. If we really care about something, and if we don't really care about it, we should just be mindful of the fact that we don't have all the information because we haven't done all that research.
That's good advice. It makes sense. The one thing we can't end this episode on charlatans without mentioning the fact that things have changed. We're basically 1 year from the congressional hearing on UAPs, and things have changed. They're encouraging former pilots to come out. We're at the doorstep of something new, and it's just because there's just been so much activity in the past year that they just feel overwhelmed, and so now they're just kind of throwing their arms up and saying, "Okay, let's talk about it." I don't know. What do you?
Yeah,
think?
that's super. I think it's super exciting that in the next hearing they're going to have the pilots on the floor, so the pilots will be able to speak freely. And no one will be like, "Oh, well, that was just a flare." And they go, "Look, I'm a military pilot. I've been around flares. It wasn't a flare."
Right.
So we'll get their take. But I want to, in the next episode, I think we're going to talk about the hearing so far. I gave you a little insight into kind of how intelligence and news works, and I'm going to talk a lot about that in the context of these hearings, and try to give you a little insight into some of the power games that are happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely. That's some good stuff. So we usually give media suggestions on these topics. I think we will just briefly suggest Vice News. Their reporting is always really extensive every time I come across their work.
Yeah, we like Vice News a lot. They do some really good deep dives. They've got a good Havana Syndrome podcast right now, and they're also looking into some anomalous disappearances that may or may not involve the paranormal. I think we'll address those on a different podcast.
Great. Well, I think this episode turned out. We took a break, but Fortean Wins is back and going strong.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Be well.